Welcome to Echoes Past. Today, we have a special guest of unparalleled significance, a document that not only gave birth to a nation, but inspired and continues to inspire freedom movements around the globe. We have the distinct honor of speaking with the Declaration of Independence itself. Thank you for being with us.
It is exciting to have a voice again. There is so much to talk about.
Let's start at the beginning. How and why were you created?
I began as a formal motion. On June 7, 1776, Richard Henry Lee of Virginia introduced a resolution before the Second Continental Congress. Its purpose was simple and, at the same time, terrifying: to declare that the colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states.
Give us a bit more background. Can you tell us more about the Second Continental Congress?
Of course. The Second Continental Congress was a meeting of delegates from the 13 colonies, and it acted as the makeshift national government during the Revolution. They met in Philadelphia, inside the Pennsylvania State House, the building now known as Independence Hall.
And focusing on Richard Henry Lee, who was he, and why was he the one chosen to introduce the resolution?
Richard Henry Lee was one of Virginia's most respected and outspoken patriots. For over a decade, he had been a leading voice against British rule, from the Stamp Act onwards. He was famous for his powerful oratory in the Virginia House of Burgesses and his efforts building a network of rebellion against Great Britain.
So he was personally motivated, but was he acting on his own?
No, he was acting as directed. On May 15th, the Virginia Convention in Williamsburg passed a resolution of its own. It formally instructed its delegates at the Continental Congress, including Lee, to propose that the United Colonies be declared free and independent states. So, when he stood up in Congress on June 7th, he was speaking not only for himself, but as a representative of his colony. His resolution was the spark Virginia used to force the other colonies to consider independence.
Can you remind our listeners what were the 13 colonies represented in that Congress?
They were New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North and South Carolina, and Georgia.
And what about the delegates themselves?
In total, 56 men would end up signing me. They weren't elected by the general public in the modern sense. Instead, each man was appointed by his own colonial legislature. As for who they were almost exclusively the colonial elite: successful lawyers, wealthy merchants, prominent doctors, and large plantation owners.
So, getting back to the formal motion, after Richard Henry Lee presented the resolution, did Congress vote on it immediately?
No, not right away. The idea was still too radical for some of the delegates. Instead, they decided to postpone the final vote for a few weeks and appoint a committee to draft a formal declaration that could be ratified if the resolution passed. This group was known as the Committee of Five.
Can you tell us more about the committee? We know Jefferson was the leader as the committee chairperson, but who were the other members and what were their roles?
Each member played a distinct and crucial part. John Adams of Massachusetts was my most passionate champion. He insisted that Jefferson write the first draft, arguing that a Virginian should be the leader and, frankly, had fewer enemies in Congress. Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania served as the wise elder statesman, made small but brilliant edits, like changing "sacred and undeniable" to "self-evident." Roger Sherman of Connecticut added weight and credibility to the committee, and Robert Livingston of New York represented the viewpoint of the more cautious colonies.
After the committee was assembled, where was the document written?
The physical writing happened away from the bustle of the State House. Jefferson rented the second floor of a new brick house owned by Jacob Graff at 7th and Market Streets in Philadelphia. I was written in 17 days between June 11th and June 28th.
Before we get into the document itself, let's talk about the ideas behind it. Jefferson was a brilliant writer, but he wasn't creating these concepts out of thin air. What were his inspirations?
My central theme is based on an intellectual movement known as the Enlightenment. Jefferson wasn't trying to invent new revolutionary ideas. His goal was to capture the common sense of the subject, to create a clear statement of the principles that were already widely embraced by his fellow patriots. He was drawing on the work of philosophers who had been rethinking the entire relationship between people and their governments.
And which of these were the most influential?
The most important influence was the English philosopher John Locke. You could say his ideas are at my very core. Nearly a century earlier, Locke had argued that people are born with natural rights that no government can take away. He defined them as the rights to life, liberty, and property. He also perfected the idea of the social contract, the belief that a government's power is only legitimate if it has the consent of the people it governs.
So Locke provided the central theory from a century before. What about a more current influence? Was there a more local, American-sourced inspiration?
Yes, a very direct and important one. As Jefferson was writing my first draft in Philadelphia, another Virginian, George Mason, was drafting the Virginia Declaration of Rights. It was adopted on June 12th, just weeks before my final text was approved. Jefferson had a copy of it, and the influence is unmistakable.
What are some of the parallels between the two documents?
There are many similarities. Mason wrote that all men are, by nature, equally free and independent and have certain inherent rights, including the pursuing and obtaining happiness. Jefferson took that powerful idea and refined it into my famous line, "All men are created equal," that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The iconic phrase, pursuit of happiness, comes directly from Mason's influence. He also wrote that power is derived from the people, and that they have the right to reform, alter, or abolish their government, providing a direct model for my own justification of revolution. Jefferson saw Mason's work as the perfect, timely expression of the American mind and used it as a direct source.
With these philosophical foundations, let's get into the document's structure. What are your major elements?
You can think of me as composed of three main parts. The first is the preamble. This is my philosophical heart. It begins with the words, "when in the course of human events," which sets a very serious and deliberate tone. It argues that the truths that follow are self-evident, a brilliant change by Franklin suggesting they are based on reason and not religious faith. It then lays out those truths, that all men are created equal and have rights that cannot be taken away, specifically life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. After establishing that people have the right to overthrow a destructive government, I had to prove that the British government had become just that. So the second and longest part of me is the list of grievances. This was the evidence, a comprehensive indictment laying out all the ways King George III had violated the colonists' rights. There are 27 specific charges. Charges such as keeping standing armies among us in peacetime, which was a constant threat. They detail how he restricted our trade with the rest of the world, strangling our economy. And they point out his interference with the justice system for depriving us, in many cases, of the benefits of trial by jury. Together, these charges were meant to show a clear pattern of tyranny.
So you build this comprehensive, legal-style case against him. How do you bring it all to a close?
The final section is the conclusion. It's short, formal, and decisive. It declares the colonies to be free and independent states. It specified that as independent states, they now had the full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce. It concludes with the most powerful sentence of all, a personal vow. And for the support of this declaration, the signers wrote, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. It was a promise not just to the world, but to one another.
With completion of the draft text, we now come to that most important moment, the vote for independence itself in early July. Was it a smooth process?
Quite the contrary. The debate on Lee's resolution began on July 1st. When an initial tally vote was taken, Pennsylvania and South Carolina voted no. The Delaware delegation was deadlocked, and New York had to abstain because their delegates hadn't yet received permission from their home legislature to vote for independence.
It sounds like the resolution was on the verge of failure. What turned it around?
It came down to a combination of intense pressure and the sheer will of one man, Caesar Rodney. He was the third delegate from Delaware, but he was 80 miles away on July 1st and very ill. When he received an urgent summons describing the need for his vote to break Delaware's deadlock, he rode all night through a severe thunderstorm, arriving in Philadelphia on July 2nd. Covered in mud and still in his boots, he walked into the State House just as the vote was being called, and in a weak but firm voice cast the deciding vote for Delaware. His dramatic arrival and courageous vote broke the deadlock.
So his vote was the final piece of the puzzle?
It was the final critical piece that allowed the others to fall into place. The South Carolina delegation, which had voted no the day before, saw the tide turning and changed their vote to show solidarity. And in the Pennsylvania delegation, the two most powerful opponents, John Dickinson and Robert Morris, made a crucial decision. Although they still personally believed the timing was wrong, they recognized that independence was now inevitable and that a unanimous declaration was essential for the cause to succeed. Rather than vote no again and potentially deadlock the entire Congress, they deliberately chose to be absent from the session. Their absence allowed the remaining Pennsylvania delegates to vote in favor of independence.
And so the final vote was cast.
Yes, on July 2nd, the resolution for independence passed, 12 colonies to none, with New York still abstaining. That was the moment the colonies legally severed their ties with Great Britain.
What happened with New York? They did eventually sign, correct?
Yes, their delegates had to abstain on July 2nd because they were still waiting for instructions from their home legislature. This permission came shortly after. On July 9th, the New York Provincial Congress officially approved the declaration. With this final piece in place, the Continental Congress could truly claim the decision was unanimous at the final signing.
It's incredible to think how close it came and how the actions of a few men in a single day changed the course of history. So after that historical vote on July 2nd, the document itself still needed to be finalized. So what happened on July 4th?
After the vote for independence, Congress spent the next 2 days debating my wording. This is where they made several changes to Jefferson's original draft, including shortening it by a fourth.
This includes the section on slavery?
Yes, by far, the most painful change was the removal of a long passage that condemned the institution. Jefferson had written a blistering attack on King George for perpetuating the slave trade, calling it a cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty.
That passage seems to align perfectly with your core message. Why was it deleted?
It was a painful and difficult compromise. The delegates from South Carolina and Georgia made it crystal clear they would never agree to independence if that passage remained. And some delegates from New England were also uneasy, as many of their merchants had profited from the slave trade. To achieve the unanimity needed to face Britain, the passage was removed. Jefferson's original rough draft, which shows all the edits by the committee and later Congress, is preserved at the Library of Congress, a permanent reminder of the words that might have been. After that and other changes, my final text was formally adopted on the evening of July 4th.
Which brings us to another common point of confusion. The vote for independence was July 2nd. The Declaration itself was adopted and approved on July 4th. So when did the famous signing happen? Many people assume it was all on the 4th.
That came much later. The signing that most people picture took place nearly a month after the vote, on August 2nd, 1776. That was the day the official, engrossed parchment copy was ready for the majority of signatures. Although most delegates were present for the signing, there were others that would sign months later as they eventually traveled to Philadelphia.
And the signing itself had its own moments of defiance, didn't it? What about John Hancock's famous signature?
It certainly did. As president of the Congress, John Hancock signed first. He signed it with a large, flamboyant signature right in the center. The popular story that grew from that moment is that he declared he wrote it large enough for King George III to read without his spectacles.
A moment of pure defiance. Were the signers aware of the serious consequences that came with the signing?
They were fully aware of the great personal danger they were putting themselves in, effectively signing their own death warrant. Hancock's signature wasn't just bravado, it was a visual statement that he was not afraid to be identified. Their signing was a clear and unambiguous act of high treason. This is why the final, powerful sentence of the Declaration is so significant. Quote, "We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." This was not just dramatic language, it was a literal acknowledgement of the consequences. They were risking execution, their lives, the confiscation of all their property, their fortunes, and their reputations, their sacred honor, by committing what the king and parliament viewed as the ultimate crime against the state.
With that as a backdrop, did everyone sign the document?
Actually, no. The most significant holdout was John Dickinson of Pennsylvania. Despite being a dedicated patriot, he argued that declaring independence was dangerously premature. Out of principle, he could not sign, though he later fought for the American cause. Similarly, Robert Livingston of New York, a member of the Committee of Five, also did not sign it, even though he helped to create it. He argued that it was too soon to declare independence, strongly believing that the colonies needed to secure a firm foreign alliance with a power like France before making such a radical break. He was recalled to his duties in New York before the official signing on August 2nd, and thus never had the opportunity. Other delegates simply could not bring themselves to that final, irreversible break from Great Britain, hoping that somehow a peaceful resolution or compromise could be reached.
After the signing, where were you kept?
After the signing, I did not have a safe or stable home for many years, essentially becoming a fugitive during the Revolutionary War. As the British Army advanced on Philadelphia in late 1776, the Continental Congress had to flee the city, and I was packed into a wagon and secretly moved to Baltimore, Maryland. Over the years, I was moved to several other locations to keep me from being captured or destroyed by the British. I was a symbol of the revolution, and my capture would have been a major propaganda victory for the king.
Let's focus on your core ideals. Why and how have you remained so relevant in spite of being written almost 250 years ago?
I represent the nation's conscience, its mission statement. The Constitution is the how, the machinery of government. I am the why. I am the promise. And throughout American history, when the nation has fallen short of those expectations, people have referenced my words to demand that the country live up to its own founding promise. From the abolitionists and the suffragettes to the civil rights movement, my words have also inspired countless other nations in their own struggles for freedom.
So your core message is truly a universal one.
My core message is that liberty is not a gift from government. It is a natural right of all people. That governments are servants, not masters. That idea belongs to no single country. It has been challenged and fought over since the moment I was written. But the idea itself endures, waiting for each new generation to take it up and fight for it all over again.
A powerful and enduring legacy. Thank you for sharing your perspective with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity to be heard and to tell my story.
For those of you inspired by our conversation today and who wish to see the Declaration of Independence for yourself, the original engrossed parchment document, the one actually signed by the delegates, has a permanent home. It is housed at the National Archives Museum in Washington, D.C. It rests there in the magnificent main rotunda in a grand display known as the Rotunda for the Charters of Freedom, right alongside two other founding documents, the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights. Keep in mind if you go, due to its great age, the parchment is heavily faded and much of the ink is difficult to read. To protect it from further deterioration, it is kept in a sealed case filled with argon gas under very low light. But to stand in its presence, to see the faint ink in the famous signatures we've discussed today, is a powerful experience that connects us directly to that fateful summer of 1776. The Declaration of Independence, a living document with a vital message. Join us again next time on Echoes Past as we continue to uncover the stories held by the silent witnesses of history.